It's really excellent to see everyone. I think we're still in the post-COVID, we haven't seen you for 2 or 3 years mode, aren't we? It's great that everyone's here. So thank you all for coming. One thing before we start, fire drill. There is no drill this afternoon, so if it goes off, it will be real. There are exits here or out the front door, and we convene outside beside the Duke of York statue, which I think is out there. So basically follow the exit routes if we need to. Can I introduce myself, Colin Galbraith? I'm chair of JNCC. Delighted to see you all at this important day, an important time for nature conservation. Nature recovery is key, and we'll hear more about that in the next few minutes. I was reflecting before this meeting that 30 years ago in Rio, the Convention on Biological Diversity was negotiated. That was 1992, 30 years. And in that time, a lot of action for the environment has taken place. The first country, I think, to respond to the Rio Convention, as it was called, was the UK. And we produced an action plan in 1994, 2 years after the convention, which was fantastically quick. It was a time of real opportunity, a time of real enthusiasm and real dynamism. And I should say I was involved in that. I drafted the data and information chapter for the UK Biodiversity Action Plan. I know you're looking and saying, how can that possibly be? But I did. And I think 30 years ago, but still now, science and information is critical to what we're about. The intervening years, 30 years, have seen a lot of change in the world. Change to ecosystems, change to habitats, change to species, mainly decline, sadly. And of course, a recognition more recently that climate change is a serious threat to nature and indeed to us all. The other part I think that we've learned over that time is that nature can be part of the solution. It's not a counsel of despair. I think 30 years on, we're once again at a pivotal stage for nature and for the need for us all to work together. And that's why today is so important. We are in JNCC working alongside with our colleagues in the country agencies right across the UK, and we'll come to the panel session in a few minutes, but actually having this as a 4-country event with JNCC coordinating and actually facilitating is exactly where I think JNCC really adds value. The opportunity now is COP15 that will happen in a few weeks, a real opportunity for nature. That's why we're so keen that we are launching the statement that we've got today, and we'll hear more of this from Gemma in a few minutes, a statement there and a Welsh version as well, which is excellent. But it is about taking the opportunity. There are moments in time where we can clearly change things for the better. As we will hear, recovery of nature is not really optional. It's actually for our own well-being, for our own sake, to protect ecosystems, the land, our oceans that sustain us in a multitude of ways. And again, many years ago, I was involved in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, global assessment. You realize this is really serious stuff, that we need to protect our environment in new ways. So for many years, the conservation community has gathered information on how we can do this, on how to support nature recovery. And we now present that in this statement today as a framework, a blueprint for action going forward. It's not just a blueprint. The statement is supported by more detail. We've put some examples in it, but last year we published the Nature Positive 2030 report that laid out, again, clear actions that can be taken. We can't do this action alone in agencies or in government, and that, again, is why today is so good. It's about partnership, government, NGOs, industry, right across the UK. So to help rebuild nature, and to do so, we do need your help. Nature and climate change are intertwined crises, and it is important and pivotal for our sustainable economy and to underpin our overall societal well-being that we do take action going forward. We'll hear more in a minute. For me, nature is also part of our heritage. It's part of our collective culture. It's part of who we are, actually, when you look at it. So when we harm nature, we do harm ourselves. So let's not do that. Let's try and recover nature together for the future. So with that, can I hand over to Gemma Harper, who's the Chief Executive JNCC, who will introduce the statement to us. Gemma.
Thank you very much, Colin, and good afternoon to you all. A very Warm welcome to this magnificent and inspiring scientific venue. I can't think of a better place to be with you today. And first of all, a huge thank you to all the teams across the agencies that made this event happen. As you will all realise and imagine, there's a huge amount of work that goes behind the scenes, producing an informed consensus statement as well as hosting this kind of event. So we are very, very grateful. JNCC's mission is to turn science into action for nature conservation and recovery. And in my time in JNCC the last 18 months, I'm clear that that requires collaboration and compassion and courage. And it's our privilege as JNCC to host you all today at this event. Today marks a new beginning for the UK statutory nature conservation bodies, the Council for Nature Conservation and Countryside, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, Natural England, Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scot, and JNCC. Building on years of scientific collaboration and innovation, these 6 organisations have recommitted to speak whenever we can with one voice for nature, to demonstrate our common purpose and strength in unity, whilst respecting and celebrating our differences across our 4 countries. The launch of our joint statement today is our response to the consistent and compelling evidence of the vital role that nature plays in our prosperity, in our well-being, in our very survival. Many of us, if not all of us, value nature in and of itself. I know I do. But equally, we know that nature is our life support system. Ecological collapse and climate breakdown, so let's call them what they are, threatens humanity and will have, indeed is having, the greatest impact on the most marginalised and disadvantaged communities around the world. Without healthy nature, climate stabilisation, economic security, water and food security cannot be achieved. And we know, as Colin has mentioned, that if we fail on one of these global biodiversity or climate crises, we will fail on both. Our message today is clear. We must act now to include nature's recovery in the decision-making processes of all 4 countries of the UK. As Colin said, this message builds on previous collaborative work in Nature Positive 2030. In that document, which you have in your pack, this SNCB set out an ambitious framework for what it would be like for the UK to genuinely go high on nature and low on carbon. And if you haven't read that document, I would really encourage you to do so. Ahead of COP15, Colin, in 2 weeks' time, less than a fortnight, it's really important and timely that we are here today and we reiterate what our joint statement is emphasising. Firstly, it is not too late to recover nature. We all know what needs to be done, and importantly, how to do it. Investing in nature's recovery is investing in the prosperity and well-being of the 4 countries of the UK. And the sooner we act for nature, and the sooner we act together for nature, the sooner we will all benefit. Put simply, we can't risk any further damage to the ecosystems that support us all. We all need to deliver on the ambitions of a new global action plan for nature, which will be negotiated at COP15. Nature is calling us, all of us. The statutory nature conservation bodies hear that call every day, and we stand ready to support governments and stakeholders across the UK, and in JNCC's case, across the world, to ensure nature recovery for the survival, prosperity, and well-being of humanity. We are here today, unified, stronger together for nature. Thank you.
Gemma, thank you very much indeed for that powerful statement, and we'll go into some of the detail of that when we come to the panel session, but thank you for now. We move on then to, we had hoped that Lord Bennion would be with us. Unfortunately, he can't. He's in the House this afternoon but many of you will know Lord Bennion. He's our minister in terms of the international scene, in terms of COP15 in particular. He's a keen advocate for the environment, for rural life, for the rural economy, a keen advocate for nature globally, very encouraging about nature recovery across the board. So what we've arranged is a short video by the Minister that we will now hear, and then we'll take a couple of quick questions after that.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Gemma. And thanks to everyone for being here. I'm sorry not to be with you in person. As you will appreciate it, you're hosted by our 6 statutory nature conservation bodies: the Council for Nature Conservation and the Countryside, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, Natural England, Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scot, and Northern Ireland Environment Agency. Each plays a pivotal role in joining up our domestic nature ambition with our international leadership, supporting the recovery of nature here in the UK, in our Crown dependencies and overseas territories, and what we do in policy terms in countries around the world. It's vitally important work which the UK is proud to support, from making sure that we're safeguarding the resilient wild cousins of staple plant species, to protecting the world's corals, the countless species and communities that, of course, depend on them. I know that this is an exceptionally well-informed audience, so I'm not going to rehearse the facts and figures we already know about. And we already know, of course, about the catastrophic decline in the abundance, connectivity and diversity of life on Earth. And we just have to reiterate that everything we want to achieve, from peace to prosperity, all of it depends on our ability to reconcile our lives, businesses, our politics, and of course our economies with the natural world on which we all depend so completely. And to do it rapidly. And never before has this been so evident. We face new challenges with rocketing food prices, water scarcity, and of course not to mention our reliance on biodiversity for human health and to tackle pandemics. Now, many of us have recently arrived back home from Egypt following the climate conference. And just 2 short weeks before we all come together for the biodiversity conference, we are all here today because we understand just how important it is to come together to make Montreal the Paris moment for nature that we all so desperately need. This means an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework that puts the natural world on a pathway to recovery with ambitious goals and targets for both land and ocean, including on ecosystem protection and restoration and solid commitments on transparency and reporting. Our negotiators are making headway. The target to protect at least 30% of the land and ocean globally by 2030, the 30 by 30 target, is now supported by well over 100 countries. The UK will continue to champion this important target as leader of the Global Oceans Alliance and Ocean co-chair of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And I'd like to thank the JNCC for their support in developing a new global indicator to assess the effectiveness of our areas under 30 by 30, crucial to making this target a success. The UK has proven itself as a leader in these negotiations, leading high ambition coalitions and brokering solutions. Our G7 and COP26 presidencies took this leadership to a new level and took nature to the heart of fora where it has previously been conspicuously absent. But there's much more to agree to do, including on the complex issue of digital sequence information and how to make sure the benefits from freely available digitized genetic resources flow to those who deserve them. Through the Global Ocean Alliance, the UK will continue working to raise ambition for the ocean under the CBD to ensure that the new framework includes meaningful targets that will allow our marine environment to recover. And of course, we know that finance is the key to giving nature-rich countries confidence to sign up and unlock the ambition we all need now. Of course, the challenge looks different for each of us. As a result of setting our own national targets, what we are seeing now is an acceleration of action to meet them, across government, across society, and across sectors, from building homes and creating green jobs and introducing bylaws to protect sensitive areas of the seabed from damaging fishing activity, to reorientating land use payments so that good environmental stewardship is properly recognised and rewarded. But we also know that this is a shared global challenge, and one that we will only meet and master if we work together. We need to show the rest of the world that we are helping with much needed financial and technical assistance. Through the Blue Planet Fund, we support developing countries to implement the ambitious targets that we are fighting so hard for. And that's why your work, both domestically and internationally, is so vitally important. It's how we show that the global targets really are setting a framework for action around the world, and that these targets are catalysing action and the critical change that we all need, and that we as the UK are rolling up our sleeves to do our part to tackle the global biodiversity crisis. We have to recognise just how lucky we are to have this network and infrastructure, not just the SNCBs, but the NGOs that are behind so much of the research and action on which we are going to depend in order to implement the global framework here in the UK. Come January, we will need to leap into action, to work together for this. Just as you've set out in your joint statement, the recovery of nature, the global targets cannot be achieved by anyone working in isolation. Here in the UK, it will be an immense effort in partnership, and we see so many of these partners represented here in this room. But the next 6 weeks are critical too. The most important thing that any of us can do is to keep telling the world that this matters, that our collective future depends upon the next 6 weeks, and make sure that that message is loud and clear. Exactly what the joint statement achieves. We need to make sure everyone knows that CBD COP15 is our chance to reverse the decline of biodiversity loss, that what happens at COP15 will be pivotal in our fight against climate change, and that the post-2020 global biodiversity framework must be the Paris moment for nature. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to pass you over to our Chief Negotiator, Will Lockhart.
Thank you very much. Will Lockhart, I think, is also in the House with the Minister this afternoon, but I'm delighted to say that Andrea, it seems to be a popular place, Andrea Ledward from DEFRA, who's Director of Biodiversity and Climate Change International, is with us. And Andrea is, I think, is happy to take any quick questions that you have now. Lord Bennion had indicated he would have taken a question or two at this point. So if there are any specific questions, there are microphones, I think, roving around. If you could say who you are and then ask your question, can I encourage you also to ask a question rather than give a speech? So we can fit more people in if we can. Any quick questions for Andrea? Andrea, one from me if I can. I mean, I'm assuming you will go to COP15. The UK usually ends up doing a lot of subgroups, a lot of work behind the scenes, but what are your aspirations for the COP itself?
Thank you very much, and again, apologies from the others. I think we really are hoping it will be the Paris moment for nature, which I think means that we hope we will agree a global biodiversity framework that's ambitious, that is reflective of the current 21 targets, the 4 goals and the headline mission statement. But in order to make that happen, we have to agree, as Lord Bennion said, something on digital sequencing information. DSI, some of you may know, Will tells me there are about 10 people in the world who really understand it. And I think most of them are currently in the House, currently discussing with Will and Lord Bennion. But the UK has been very much at the forefront of trying to find a technical solution there with some with partners in the private sector. And then secondly, finance is going to be the other big stumbling block. So again, the UK has been instrumental in drafting something called the 10-point plan for finance, that was launched at the UN General Assembly with Ecuador, the Maldives and Gabon, and that has now very much become the blueprint for how we might finance the global biodiversity framework. We've got about 20 countries signed up. We're hoping to get another 60 countries signed up by CBD COP15, and that very much has been the focus of much of our diplomatic effort over recent weeks and months. But yes, we're very busy behind the scenes in many different places.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yes, take one more question at the back. If you could say who you are again.
Yes, hello, Ian Dunn from Plant Life. The UK has a really great leadership on 30 by 30, but we're starting from a very, very poor position. How are you going to support the acceleration of delivering it by 2030?
In the UK?
In the UK.
I think the UK, at the moment, the ministers are obviously considering our statutory targets that are going to be implemented under the Environment Act. So ministers will be publishing their responses on that shortly. And the other massive instrument that we've got is obviously the agricultural transition and the ELMS. And again, ministers are currently working to see how they can maximise the outcomes there to deliver both for net zero as well as the biodiversity and the nature goals. And I think once you build that on top of our existing kind of network of protected areas, particularly the national parks and the areas of outstanding natural beauty and the Glover Review, I think it shows that we've got a good network. The Nature Recovery Network is an absolutely pivotal kind of fundamental basis for that, with reforms possible. So I think ministers are fully committed to implementation.
Thank you. Time for one more quick one. Are we all happy? Take one there and then we'll move on.
Hello, Belinda Howell. I'm a trustee of the National Biodiversity Network Trust. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, is the international depository of biodiversity data for sharing and using data. The UK is the third largest contributor and user of GBIF data, but we have not been paying our way at all as a full voting member. Will we sign up to full voting membership at COP15?
What a great question. Very timely. I know the Secretary of State was talking about that this morning at Kew Gardens and was talking with Doug Gurr at the Natural History Museum just a couple of weeks ago exactly on that issue. So it's certainly something that is on our minds, I would say.
Something maybe we can come back to as well when we come to the panel discussion in terms of data and information, because it's a key theme running through the COP. Andrea, thank you very much indeed for that. That's super. Thank you. Let's move on then, if we can, to our panel session. I've never seen such a distinguished panel in all my life, who are happy to take questions as well. If I could introduce them, Claire Pillman, CEO of NRW, Paul Donnelly from the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, CEO, Eileen Stewart, Director, Nature Scott, Marion Spain from Natural England, CEO, and then Gemma Harper, our JNCC CEO. There's more acronyms in that sentence than you'll ever get in any other one. If I could start, I mean, again, what we'll have is roving microphones going round, so if you can say who you are and ask some questions. But a couple just to get us started, if I can. Maybe just go along the panel. We've heard about the statement. What contribution can your organisation make to the implementation? And if I can unfairly, Claire, start with you.
That's all right. I sat on the end, so
I know.
I knew it was either going to be first or last. Well, thank you, Colin, and really just thank you, Colin, Gemma, JNCC for hosting today and doing a huge amount of work in the run-up to this to support the work to get the joint statement together. Because I think it's the sort of what's happening globally, it's what's happening in Montreal in a few weeks' time. It's what's happening within the UK, and then critically, it's what's happening in the constituent parts of the UK. The 30 by 30 target is challenging, and I think that we need to recognise that. In Wales, we're sort of pretty well there in terms of designation. In terms of condition, we are falling way short. And, we have a government that is absolutely committed to tackling the causes and impacts of the nature and climate emergencies. We've just had a really good piece of work, ministerially led, called Biodiversity Deep Dive, which has really focused government, agencies, the wider public sector, ENGOs and others on what it will take to get us from where we are now to where we need to be in 2030. And as we've all said, we sort of know what we need to do. It's a question of mobilising everybody, getting the money in, getting the energy behind it. So we will be looking at, real investment in some of our key habitats. So Welsh Government have announced increased funding for peatland restoration, which of course meets both climate and nature sort of targets. I think the challenge for all of us is going to be keeping everyone focused on that pathway.
Yeah.
And doing that during a period which is going to be challenging in a whole load of ways, whether it's economically or cost of living or whatever. But I think it is for us as agencies, sort of separately and jointly, to be making the point that the climate and nature emergencies are not separate from these other challenges. Meeting those will help meet the wider challenge as well.
Thanks, Claire. And I think, Paul, when you come to Northern Ireland, you've got a fantastic, diverse set of habitats, terrestrial and marine. It's how can you pick up from the convention, from the COP, and implement that in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, thank you, Colin, and it's great to be here as well this morning. A bit like Claire, I suppose, we have a lot of the same challenges and opportunities, but I think coming out of COP, we're in a lot better place than we were in Northern Ireland. We have our first Climate Change Act was passed last year. We have an environment strategy ready to go once we get an executive back in place, and we have a biodiversity strategy well advanced, and we have a peatland strategy. So I think after COP, we as an agency got to use our knowledge and our skills and our experience and our data and our science to actually help drive others, particularly in policy and indeed implementers on the ground to do more, to do it at pace. I think communication is going to be a key challenge for us all. I think that we still have a lot more to do in relation to particularly in Northern Ireland. I think the business community, I think there's a huge appetite out there on the business community. I think we probably underestimate it maybe in government at times. I think they're up for the challenge, but we've got to bring people together. Our NGOs are certainly up for the challenges and willing to work with us, and we've had some good success stories recently where we have done work with our NGOs. I mean, even our main in Northern Ireland, we just have one water company. They're well bought into biodiversity and the need for change because they see the benefits. Let's be honest, they see the cost savings. They know when they re-wet peatlands that feed their reservoirs that supply the water, it actually reduces their running costs, and that's important. It's important to business, it's important to companies. So I think we are in a good place. Don't underestimate the challenge. Claire's alluded to finances. We are heading into maybe more difficult times in the public sector, and I think we have to bear that in mind as well. We probably have to do more with less, and I know people don't like that, and that it is a warning. There is a great challenge, but I think a great opportunity. I think public opinion is well in our favour. I think again we need to do more, and I think business is there. I think our NGOs are there. We just have to work in partnership and bring it all together. So that's the big challenge for us in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think when you look back over the 30 years since the convention was agreed or negotiated, we have made huge progress, in terms of the public awareness of nature, the public awareness of what needs to be done. But I think it's then, as Claire said, it's how do we do it? It's how do we take action? And Eileen, I mean, looking at Scotland, you immediately think hills and mountains and lochs, but I know that Nature Scot are doing a lot in the urban environment as well, in terms of really great schemes in Glasgow, Edinburgh, other places. And it's how do you balance that? What's your priority in terms of implementing from the COP?
Well, I think we have to tackle both. I mean, cities and towns are where people live, so we really need to bring nature close to where people live. And there are some really amazing transformational programmes that are going on in Glasgow and the urban areas in Scotland. And what that's done is shown that practical action on the ground, community-led, and that's been absolutely critical to get communities engaged and involved and designing their own green spaces so it works for them. And what they found is that it not only delivers nature, it delivers places to play, places to have leisure, but it actually is helping them deal with urban heating, it's helping them deal with air quality, all those kind of things. So I think those really practical demonstration of what those nature-based solutions can deliver across the board has just been absolutely transformative. And I think we need to build that in to all our planning frameworks, so that doesn't just become a bolt-on kind of nice to do, it becomes built into the urban planning. And the same with roads. We know that roads and all these arterial kind of networks of infrastructure are massively important for nature as well, to make those connections and develop those nature networks. So I think the roots can be either in the urban sector or the rural sector, but it's just making them join up, I think is really important.
And Marion, I mean, within England, I mean, there's a fantastic public interest. The communication of that is really key. I'm just interested how you will take, from the convention into that, communicating that message out to the public across England.
I think it starts before we go into the convention, of course, Colin. I just want to say that.
True.
I think there's a really important role for us as the statutory nature conservation bodies to give our ministers and our negotiating teams confidence and courage by showing that we can deliver on the targets. So that's the key for me, being confident that we're delivering already, and the confidence that with the ambitions we're going to hopefully sign up to, that the Paris Moment for Nature are doable. And I think there's also something, isn't there, reminding ourselves that the convention is important, the statement and the commitment is important. It's what becomes our lodestone, it's what keeps successive governments on the tramline towards those big long-term goals. But it isn't just the goals. We're also looking forward to thinking about making sure that we have financing secured, as Andrew has already referred to. We also have to have the right sort of regulation, to not just to protect nature, but to drive improvements, drive enhancement and restoration at scale. And I think the third point is exactly the point you were referring to, Bill. And I think the other thing we mustn't forget, as we go into the convention and as we come out of it, the importance of winning hearts and minds.
Yeah.
One of our ministers said to me recently, she wants nature to be as much talked about by the general public, by children in school playgrounds, as climate is. So I think there is a big communication and engagement message, because that's what we really need. You don't do this alone by government funding. You don't do this alone by regulation. You do this by everybody, from businesses through farmers to individuals, to make the right choices.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful, actually. I think it's doing that and, in a way, creating a baseline of knowledge that we need to get people up there a little bit. So it's helpful. Thank you. And Gemma, I mean, in JNCC, we've got the international agenda, we've got the context around that. How will we, he said the chair of JNCC, how will we do it, post the convention, post the negotiation and discussions? So what's our priorities?
Thank you, Colin. So I'd just like to reflect on JNCC as an organisation and where we are in terms of our values. And we have 3 core values: collaboration, innovation, and inclusion. And so for collaboration, that's what we're doing here. We have a convening function across the UK, across the 4 countries. That's our USP, if you like. It's fantastic that environmental policy is devolved, and rightly so. We still need one set of books when it comes to standards and evidence and reporting, and to be able to support the UK government in international negotiations. So JNCC has collaboration and partnership and kind of convening role at its heart. And we will, if Colin has his way, we'll do a roadshow of this across the UK next year. But we are certainly going to be in Edinburgh, we're certainly going to be in Derry with stakeholders, talking about the implications of the Global Biodiversity Framework, what it means for the UK biodiversity indicators, what it means in country. On innovation, innovation for me is very much drawing value from our ideas, from our science, from our data. And JNCC is expert with our partners in innovating and how we do evidence. So, for example, matching together satellite data with citizen science on the ground data, which gives you a power of analysis that we previously didn't have before in real time, with a great benefit of public engagement. And thirdly, on inclusion, we talk a lot about inclusion, don't we? And we're often looking inwards to our organisations. But one of our challenges is to diversify this sector. You only need to look at the audience, we really try. But how do we diversify this sector? And we do it by putting our money behind it. So we fund NGOs to build their ability to record their databases for their citizen scientists, to enable them to diversify. It's small beer from what we need. But if we're really interested in connecting the dots between economy, society, and nature, what we will find is the people who suffer most in all those 3 sectors are the same groups of people, and we need to reach them.
Thank you, Gemma. We've had one round of questions along the panel. Let's open this up to yourselves now for 10 or 15 minutes. If you could ask anything you like, preferably something about this statement. Yeah.
Not football.
Not football. Well, I have no view on football.
Thanks very much. My name is James Bullock. I'm from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I notice quite a lot of discussion is about things like protected areas, protecting nature. The title of this meeting is about nature recovery. So as a scientist, the question is, given we know protected areas sometimes aren't up to much, someone already mentioned that the condition of them. And given that we don't actually have that much which is truly protected, RSP we calculated in England, only 3 to 4% of land is truly protected. How do we go from designation, protection, etc., to nature recovery, and how do we measure that recovery? Thank you.
Thank you. Don't know if anyone wants to have a crack. Claire?
Really good question, and something that I think we've all been grappling with. And I think that whilst 30 by 30 obviously does focus on designation and designated areas, we know that actually what nature recovery needs is more habitat, bigger, better, more connected. And somebody earlier was talking about elms in England. Clearly, in Wales, the successor to the sort of previous agricultural subsidy system will be critical in delivering environmental betterment at scale. We've got an agriculture bill going through the Senedd at the moment. We've got good advanced drafts of our sustainable farming scheme. We'll be looking at that driving increased tree cover, but also improvements for habitat. So I think that is a really critical part of this, alongside the drive for 30 by 30. And I think it is about getting betterment in those designated areas. Monitoring will be key. And, you know, I think it can sometimes be difficult to make the case for monitoring. But actually, you know, we need to know what works. We need to set off boldly and bravely and all the rest of it. But we need to be monitoring, working out where we're seeing improvement, why that's coming. So I think this is going to be building it, monitoring it, adapting it as we go along. But, you know, people like you and your organisation will be absolutely key to this as we move forward.
Yeah, that last point's important. I mean, other people, yourselves and others, can really contribute to this in terms of, it's not just sites, but it's the whole wider countryside as we think of. Marianne, I think you'll comment.
I think one thought reflects one. I think we need to be careful to not conflate or not think of synonymous as designation and protection, because there are many other ways we can protect and there are many other ways we can restore. But of course, designations matter. They're almost what give us, I even found myself describing the SSSI series as the Noah's Ark the other day. They're almost the thing where we maintain a crucial core resource. So we are going to carry on doing more designations. During COP15, we in Natural England will be publishing our forward designation programme for the next 5 to 10 years. I can't tell you how many yet or how much hectarage or how much percent, because the team is still totting it up. But what I do know, those legally protected sites will only ever be a tiny percentage. They'll probably only ever be a tiny percent of the 30%, because there are many other ways that we can protect land, including through voluntary protections like covenants. But I think the other bit of the conversation, your question, is really powerful. Designation alone doesn't restore nature, does it? And again, my team is sick of me saying, but what about the other 70%? So there is something about how we genuinely begin to spread nature, spread from those core hubs, start to create a network, start to really think where are the places where we either need to restore lost habitat or continue to protect the things that may never be legally designated but are nonetheless valuable. So it's about how we engage with voluntary schemes through ELMS and so on, how we engage with landowners, communities. And as Claire says, I think the final important thing is making sure we have a version of the truth we can all stand behind. We have a monitoring scheme that gives us all confidence we are moving forward and not just always worry about what's going wrong. I have this vision, my team will thank me for this one day, that we will one day have a large map of England that starts with the current designated sites, shows the voluntary scheme spreading around them and shows them joining up into this giant green network across the country. Watch this space, maybe for next year.
Brilliant vision. Take one more comment from this from Gemma, then I'll move on to another question. Gemma.
So obviously a great question, and CEH and JNCC working very closely together. And you remember we had that workshop where we said, what is the biodiversity equivalent of 1.5? and it's really, really hard. And so therefore, to start to model it, to measure it, to think about baselines, it becomes a really challenging proposition for when you're dealing with nature recovery. It doesn't mean we can't do a version of it, but we're never going to have that single metric, or if we do, it's going to be wrong in some way or another. And the other thing I would say about it is my observation of the sector, the environmental sector, is it can be difficult to talk about winners and losers. But for me, that's about making the implicit explicit, because there are winners and losers by all the policies that are being implemented already. We're just not very explicit about it. The answer to what does success look like is a conversation that has to be, why do these things matter to us? Why do these species, habitats, ecosystems, natural capital matter either in and of themselves or to us? And ultimately, those are not necessarily going to be science judgments. They're going to be value judgments. And that's why I think we need to go broader than the natural sciences into the social sciences to get an understanding of what recovery looks like, and when we think about what we're willing to pay for, what we're not willing to pay for as well.
Okay, I've got quite a queue now actually coming. I'm going to go there first, in the middle. We need some punchy questions and punchy answers, I think is what I'd say, if we can.
Hello, Peter Barham. I'm chair of the Seabed User and Developer Group, a loose affiliation of marine industries, all of which are interested in sustainable development and working closely with government. Gemma, you've worked closely with us over the years. We regretted you leaving DEFRA and going to JNCC, but never mind. Congratulations. But we talked a lot about innovation when we worked together, and we agree with you, we need innovation. We need to do new things to make sure that we can work together to deliver conservation and in particular recovery. There are mechanisms like net gain coming through. We need to make sure industry remains positive about those. I'd appreciate people's views about how we keep industry positive. But one real question is, in your opening comments, Chair, you talked about the need for consistency across the 4 DAs. Couldn't agree more. Let's have some consistent targets. Do we also need consistent legislation to make sure they're actually delivered?
That's the question. That's a good
question. That is my question.
It's a very good question, Gemma. A good answer.
I think it's a question for countries.
Do we need consistent legislation or consistent approach overall, or how do we do it?
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think the international framework gives us a really good starting place.
Yeah.
And I think if we have international targets that drive us all in the same direction, then that's the foundation that we all build then. Legislation is appropriate to our national situations, national identity. So I think that's where we work, and I think that's where JNCC's role is absolutely critical. And what we do through JNCC is compare, contrast, make sure that we have consistent evidence base, we have consistent tools, we have consistent targets. I mean, they might not be identical, and I think there's a distinction between all having identical systems or having comparable systems, and I think that's where we'll get to, and that's the value of JNCC in this working partnership, that we collaborate and we make sure that we can coalesce these things so we have a UK position and a UK driving the agenda forward. So
thanks, Eileen. I think that's a good answer. Yep. Question at the back.
Thank you. Beatrix Schlapp-Riddy from the British Antarctic Survey. I'm very grateful, Gemma, for your final comment about inclusivity. It's such a tragedy that both enjoying nature and looking after it tends to be the prerogative of the socioeconomically privileged at the moment. And I'm very grateful to hear that JNCC is addressing this. And I wonder whether across the panel, you might have examples of where this is showing positive effects, just to inspire all of us to become part of the solution for this as well.
Thank you. Very quick, good examples of good practice.
I guess one quick example is the work we've been doing in Natural England on green infrastructure, which isn't as dull as it sounds. So we've been doing work so that all local authorities understand where they have got deficits in access to nature in terms of physical access. Where are there no green spaces? Where is there no access? So that's a really powerful tool that's been adopted immediately by, for example, Greater Manchester, who are now using that to drive both the requirements they put on planners as to where and on developers as to where net gain needs to create green infrastructure, but also driving their own investments.
Thank you.
Just a very other quick, simple example. We've been working with schools and education facilities in the most disadvantaged areas in Scotland so that we can train teachers and make sure that they know where their green space, know where their natural areas are, and can take people out and young people experience and very early get that understanding of what nature, the value of nature. And they're bringing families and the wider community into these spaces. So it is that urban environment. We tend to sometimes overlook that and be kind of focused on the kind of nice green sort of pastures and mountains, but we do need to be working in the heart of where communities are.
Thank you, Annie.
I would just point out that Dr. Geeta Ludra is here and has done some fantastic work. Do you want to say something quickly, Geeta?
I'm a grassroots activist and academic, and I'm living in the Chilterns, and one of the things I'm trying to do is encourage people from adjacent areas, whether they're Luton, Slough, High Wycombe, to enter the Chilterns for the first time, and developing a programme of educational experiences, but also getting the views of our community so that they're actually leading some of the events, some of the routes, some of the work, and including some of the ancestral and heritage ways of connecting with nature. So kind of dismantling some of the ways in which power and privilege work in green spaces, and looking at who's leading the narrative and how are we genuinely giving up space and power so that those from minority ethnic communities who do have an engagement with nature and are interested are actually kind of leading the path for different ways of engaging and looking at engagement through a more critical lens, really.
Thank you
the
for that.
Traditional dominant lens.
A really important bit of work, actually. I'd be interested to hear how it turns out, actually, what the results are. We've got 5 minutes left for this section, so we've got a massive hands. Got one down here and then just immediately behind as well. Just down here. Brian? Yeah.
Thank you. It's Brian May. I'm here on behalf of the Save Me Trust. I'm sitting with a vegan, but I'm not actually a vegan myself, although I enjoy vegan food. Wonderful to be sitting here with people who speak the same language, and I'm feeling some hope for the first time for a very long time. So thank you for the invitation. My question is, I don't know if this is taboo territory, but because we now know that animal farming has such a strong negative effect on global warming and also on biodiversity, are we able to put together something in the statement just simply to ask people to eat less meat?
Thanks. It's a very clear question. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle it. I mean, we need to do everything we can to reduce our impact on the world, and what you outline there is one of the key parts. And when you see large-scale animal farms, they are obviously having quite a significant impact. But I don't know if anyone wants to give any sort of response. Gemma?
All I would say is I'm a Gemmatarian, Brian, and I try and minimise the impact I have on the planet. I was vegetarian for all my life, and then I went to Knepp and I went to Helen Browning's farm. And I've started eating meat, and not because I don't care about animal welfare, I absolutely do, but I care about the wider perspective in terms of biodiversity. And I believe, and it's a personal belief, that you can move to a situation of nutrition and diet, which doesn't have to be a thing, vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, whatever it is, but is a recognition that the way in which we farm is really important. We do have really good examples of regenerative farming. We do have a really good programme of work to transition agriculture, and the best farms across the country are really beneficial for biodiversity. So I've moved away from the idea that, well, just not eating meat would be a really big part of the solution. I think there's a need to reduce meat overall. There's a definite need to improve the welfare standards of the production of meat. But it's probably a more interesting debate now when you look at what the agriculture section is actually doing.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm going to, very briefly, Eileen, if you can, I'm going to try and take another couple of questions. No, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it is an absolutely critical issue for us to address. In Scotland, 50% of the carbon emissions come from our land. So that's not just farming, but, you know, a very large proportion of that is farming. We've got peat issues as well. So it is something we need to address. And I think working with farmers, because it's absolutely critical that they come with us, because they're the solution to carbon and biodiversity loss. So what we're trying to do is work with farming policy, farming support systems to get support for different types of farming, regenerative farming, soil health, diversification, pollination, all these things to be built in. So it won't be probably no meat, but we should have less meat, better quality meat, more resilient farming networks that deliver for people, and for nature. So there's a direction of travel there that I think we're all on, and it's just taking the farming community with us, I think is going to be key.
I think, I think a very good question. I think it's where the stakeholder piece is really important. There is, in Northern Ireland, it's a very big issue, a lot of tension between the environment and agriculture in particular. But we have to bring everybody together, and I think that's the key, that we've pitted the agri sector against the environment sector, and that hasn't done us any good. We have to really work hard to bring them together, and I think the agriculture sector are up for it. But it is a big challenge, and agriculture is so important in Northern Ireland. But the only way to do it is through collaboration.
Claire, very briefly, if you can.
I think it's a really interesting question, and it relates back to that: what can people do? What can each and every one of us? What are the choices that we can make that make a difference? And I think that in the climate space, people are much clearer about what the decisions are, what the things they can do to make a difference. I think in the nature space, there's a lot more to be done to sort of have this educated debate, which is much more complex than simply meat or no meat, and how you manage land and how the choices in terms of what you buy, who you buy it from, can have a huge impact on nature, both in this country and critically in the supply chain overseas.
Thanks, Claire. We're now running 5 minutes over this little block, so every question is another cup of coffee gone, as it were. But there are two people very patient, one there and one over here. So we come to the gentleman there, and if the panel can be really tight on answers, please.
So, Chris Butler-Stroud from Whale and Dolphin Conservation. Does the Treasury get this? Do they understand? And will we ever see a situation where the Treasury statements, budgets, will start with a discussion about nature recovery and natural capital and then go on to talk about GDP and things?
I think if I can touch on that, I mean, Dasgupta is all I would say to it in terms of the thought process, in terms of where we're moving towards and what it actually means for the country. But I don't know if anybody wants to add to that. Marion, briefly.
I suppose the other thing I'd add, and I'm not a spokesman for the Treasury, and I shouldn't pretend. I think the other question, the other important challenge for those of us in the sector is not to fall into the trap of thinking government will or government should pay for all of this. I think the debate now about green financing, which for me ranges from what you might almost call the voluntary philanthropic end of business. Businesses are increasingly saying to me they need to do good things for nature because their investors and their employers matter. So it's becoming a business risk management issue, even if they don't actually impact on nature. But right through to the other end, and this is perhaps where Treasury can help us more, this type of thing where we need to have the externalities of the impact that business has on nature far more exposed and far more funded by the polluter. Sort of the polluter pays principle, I think, is what will drive genuine investment in nature way beyond what the Treasury can do.
Thanks, Marion. I'm going to move us on. I've got one very patient questioner down here somewhere. I think it was. If you come, was it you? Yeah. I think you've been waiting a while, and then I'll come back. There might be one more right at the very back, and that has to be where we end.
Thank you. I'm Kit Stoner, CEO of the Bat Conservation Trust. It's really heartening to hear the ambition from the SNCBs and JNCC. I just wanted to know, how do we, the ENGOs and SNCBs, work together to ensure that we don't lose the wildlife protections that we already have, as well as building on them?
I think, can I maybe just quickly answer that? I mean, one of the impressions I got when I took over as chair of JNCC was that we need to rebuild that relationship. We need to rebuild that dialogue. And we need to actually look at the commonalities. And conservationists like a good argument and like a good fight, don't they? But actually, we've got an awful lot more in common than we have that differentiates between organisations. So I'm certainly very keen that we do, as you say, we rebuild that understanding, that commonalities is all I would say. But I don't know if anyone wants to add. Eileen, very brief, or Paul?
No, I totally agree, Colin. And I think we have to build the joint capability and capacity, in our own organisations and across government, but particularly in the ENGOs. We have to, we probably don't have the capacity and capability where we need it to be. So we all got to work together to do that.
Claire?
Just can't do it on our own, and nor can anyone. So I think this is an emergency, and perhaps some of those things that have occupied ENGOs and agencies in the past. I think we need to put those down and work together really, really effectively to tackle the very immediate issues in front of us.
Eileen?
Well, I was just going to say, going back to the farming question, if you look at some of the other lobbying group, if you want to call us that, in how effective they are at coming together of a very, very simple messages and how useful that is in the political and economic game. And I think we have to get better at that. And I think this statement is a good platform. If we could use that as a rallying cry, and if, all of our NGOs, I mean, we are a collective here, that if we all sang from one hymn book voice, anyway, get mine, then it would be hugely powerful. So I think there's work we can do together just to kind of build up that voice momentum.
Marion, final word? Sorry, I'm going to move us on.
I think we have to use the trust that we're talking about that's built up a lot of issues to also be brave and challenge each other. Because we can't assume, it is the current system is not working, or it isn't enough. So I think there's some brave conversations between the NGOs and the statutory bodies and our government ultimate policy deciders about what is the system we need for the future. And I hope that's one of the other things, that the tipping point of COP, if we do get to that Paris moment, if we do get that guiding star we can all start driving hard towards, it then gives us perhaps some confidence to challenge ourselves harder on what's not working.
Thanks very much, Marion. Final question. I think it's at the very back, Becky.
Yeah, it's Becky Spate from the RSPB, but asking on behalf of the Wildlife Trust, who's being very gentlemanly next to me as well. So my question is, and it builds on what you've all been saying, which is that we are absolutely in crisis, and the losses of wildlife have been catastrophic. We are in a terrible situation, and we must make sure that COP15 delivers that guiding light. We must do all we can to get there. And I particularly feel the hot breath of this crisis on my neck as a leader in our sector, kind of every morning when I wake up, and I'm sure you do as well. And I just wanted to know, given the crisis, given what we've got to achieve, what is the one big shift, the one thing you are going to really do differently in your organisation to ensure we get there by 2030?
Brilliant question. It was the last one I was going to ask the panel anyway, so I'm going to start with Gemma if I can. What's the one thing we will do differently following COP?
We're going to speak loudly and courageously at every opportunity in a way we haven't done for the last 30 years.
Marion?
We are going to be honest and focus our efforts where we have the most impact, not doing the stuff we do just because it is our statutory duty.
Eileen, thank you.
We're going to work to mainstream nature across all of public bodies, because it can't just be a nice thing to do. It has to be built into our marine environment, our land use environment. It has to go across all sectors of government.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I suppose I would say we just have to get everybody on the same page. So from business to ENGOs to public sector to communities to schools to children to young people, old people, we just really need to communicate better.
We're going to use all the tools at our disposal, and we have a wide remit, and use all of those to support nature recovery, and to support others to do so too. And I think that leading by example, trying stuff out, seeing what works, because it's not easy. And if you're in a busy other organisation and nature isn't your main focus, you need help and support, and you need to know what works elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. Thank you all for their questions as well. And the panel, I think, have done a fantastic job. So thank you very much. If someone can give me a word for the swap over from a chief exec to a chair, then that would be good, because that's what we've just done. I'm delighted that we've got the chairs of the agencies with us, and we'll introduce them all in a sense. Could I start with Tamara? Tamara, it's wonderful you're with us. Tamara is the Permanent Secretary in DEFRA, wide experience in government, worked in various departments in terms of home safety, in terms of a range of other economic sort of driven purposes. So Tamara, we're delighted you're with us. I say that particularly because I don't think your details are in the little sheets that we've handed out. What we're going to do is ask each chairperson to give us 2 minutes, just a summary of their reflections on the statement. Asking a chair to say anything in 2 minutes I know is impossible, but we'll see how it goes. If we could perhaps start at the far end with Scotland, it's Professor Pete Higgins, who's a Nature Scotland board member. Pete.
Okay, good afternoon. thank you for the opportunity to speak at this auspicious event, and my congratulations to the SNCB for producing such a succinct and powerful statement. As you might expect, I wish to comment on Scotland's approach to tackling the nature-climate crisis. So throughout, I'll refer to we. I didn't do it all on my own, by the way. And by this, I mean the Scottish Government, NatureScot and partners. Whilst we were one of the first countries to declare a climate emergency, setting 2045 as our target for reaching net zero, over the last year, we've made several new biodiversity commitments. So let me touch on a few. Our £65 million multi-year nature restoration fund supports projects that restore wildlife and habitats on land and sea and addresses the twin biodiversity and climate crises. For example, our Minister, Lorna Slater, who is unable to be here today as she prepares to attend COP15 in her native Canada, has announced support for the expansion of the beaver population, with the IUCN, NatureScot and more than 50 stakeholders recently publishing Scotland's national beaver strategy. Our annual native woodland creation target of 4,000 hectares was surpassed last year, despite the main planting season being severely affected by winter storms. Well, it is Scotland, isn't it, really? We're investing heavily in peatland restoration to reduce carbon emissions with a 10-year, £250 million fund for peatland restoration, with 35,000 hectares already on the road to recovery. In a fortnight, we will publish a draft 25-year biodiversity strategy tying in closely with the Global Biodiversity Framework to be signed off at COP15. We have committed to large-scale nature restoration being evident by 2045, and our ambition is to halt biodiversity loss by 2030, with at least 30% of our land area and 36% of our seas protected for nature. Aligned closely with this, we're consulting on the Scottish Government's commitment to create at least one new national park. We're also in the final stages of proposing the Flow Country peatlands in the far north of Scotland as a World Heritage Site, and appreciate the support of the UK and Scottish ministers in developing the case for inscription. Scotland led the development of the Edinburgh Declaration on post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be ratified at COP15, which ensures work done by subnational governments, cities and local authorities features more prominently in international reporting on progress in halting biodiversity loss. I'll finish with the words NatureScot devised to highlight the importance of COP26. Nature is climate, climate is nature. Our job is to make this phrase widely understood and, wherever appropriate, a driver for all our individual, corporate and policy decisions. Thank you.
Tamara, if you can go with me, I'd like to give you the final word, so I'll come back to you if that's okay. We should have got the order, seating order. Can I move then to Sir David Henshaw, who's chair of NRW in Wales? David.
Well, I'll stay here if I can, and forget some of that. I've been struck two things that just happened today. One, that Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, always talks about borrowing the future rather than what we leave to those who pass on from us. And I think borrowing it is a good way. And this morning I saw a cutting from our service saying that these school children in a village in North Wales have just been awarded a big prize from us, collecting tons of acorns to be planted in the nursery to grow more oak trees for the future. And I just realised the scale of that narrative that actually needs to permeate the whole of our world around this whole nature issue starts with the kids. And we've clearly got penetration there, but we are nowhere near the penetration we need across the wider public and this whole agenda around diversity. That's the first thing. In Wales, we are an integrated organisation of tackling this all at the same time. And we are going through at the moment a big revisit of our corporate plan, a dreadful bureaucratic exercise. But at the core of that lies a mission to be more assertive as the regulator, to tell more truth to power, to be more powerful with the public about what's really going wrong and what needs to be done. And so we're using that plan as a way of trying to mobilise that, working with the third sector. I use the phrase getting others to help do the lifting with us rather than just us doing the lifting. But also the private sector. You need to scale this up. You cannot do this using the public sector levers. They don't work well enough. And the final thing that really troubles me a lot is that we talk an awful lot about the separate climate and nature. It's been referred to many times here. We have got to link those together in the public mind. But without this nature agenda, we will not survive this climate agenda. So from Natural Resources Wales, we are attempting through a greatly integrated programme, working with government, Team Wales we call it, to really ramp up the scale and pace of what we're doing.
Thank you very much. And then Tony Juniper, Chair of Natural England. Tony, sorry, I've timed that badly as well.
No, that's all right,
Okay,
Colin,
great.
thank you. So, well, it's difficult to know what to add, isn't it, at this stage? There's so many important things have been said. I think I'll just pick up a theme, actually, that David touched on there, which is this theme of integration and taking joined-up approaches to all of this. Really important to reflect on the fact that we have been doing conservation, in inverted commas, as an official government legislated activity in this country for more than 70 years, and it hasn't worked. Stuff is still going down. And I think that says we have to do something rather different if we are going to begin the gargantuan task of turning this decline into recovery. And so what needs to be different? And I think the main thing that needs to be different is more integrated approaches. You've had environment, or worse still, conservation as a separate silo of activity for government and society, when in fact it is about literally everything. And until you make it something which is about everything, it's not going to work. We have to have nature recovery embedded firmly in agriculture, in particular, in development planning, infrastructure, how we tackle climate change, how we look at public health, how we look at resilience to future climate shocks. If we can embed nature recovery in into all of that, then we have a chance. And so this is about integration, I think, at 3 levels. So one is about achieving integrated outcomes in particular places. So in the same place, a river catchment, can you catch carbon, make the river cleaner, produce food more sustainably, recover nature, and make better places for people to enjoy? The answer is yes, you can. If you do a second level of integration, which is to bring together all of the tools, biodiversity net gain, new farm subsidies, the planning system, payments for ecosystem services like carbon, if you can deploy those in a mosaic in that same landscape, you can do all of those things. And in order to integrate the outcomes and the tools, you have to integrate the people, and that is the official agencies, the farmers, the house builders, the water company, and the local community. And if you can do that stitching together at those 3 levels, then I think we can have a transformation. But this is going to require us to break out of the silos, which currently keep us on parallel tracks, which at best are working side by side. Sometimes they're clashing. And if we can do that, not only do we achieve better outcomes, my expectation is we do it for much greater efficiency of government spend. Because if you're spending your flood budget and your agriculture budget to achieve multiple outcomes, you're going to get more value than just achieving one.
Thank you.
That's what I'd say.
And Hilary Kirkpatrick, Chair of CNCC in Northern Ireland. Hilary.
Yes, I think he's left the Irish to last because talking's a competitive sport in our part of the world. We've heard a lot today, and I mean, I'm immensely grateful to JNCC for the convening power that we, as part of the nature conservation bodies in the UK, the fact that you bring us together is really, really useful. I want to turn your thoughts towards what is an iconic landscape for people on our island, which is peatland. And that is something where there's a win for climate, there's a win for nature. And the skills are there, the collaboration is there, the possibility of doing something which really drives both those agendas forward is in front of us. And I think we should grasp it. And we grasp it not just with the head, but with the hands and the heart. We work collaboratively with others. We get the data right. We get the metrics right. We show government that it can be done, that we're going in the right direction. But as Gemma rightly articulated, and lots of other people said today, we should not be scared to appeal to the heart, because it will take courage and imagination and commitment. And that's what we're signing up for.
Thank you. And Tamara, if we can.
Thank you. I want to pick one key theme from what I've taken for today, and that is leadership. So, look, it's a critical moment. We've talked about the nature's recovery in the UK and globally, and in this room, We know the risks, and we understand the evidence, and we know that nature underpins our economic prosperity and our well-being, and it's under threat. And ahead of COP, we need to show leadership, to marshal that evidence, to explain the actions needed, and to negotiate and persuade in our nations and globally. So I want to thank JNCC for their leadership in bringing us together today, and for their work day in and day out, grounded in science and working across the UK for nature, and to recognise the leadership of the signatories to the statement, bringing your expertise to bear. It is now crucial that we amplify the messages in the statement, and your collaboration is going to make that possible. At DEFRA, we lead in government in explaining the importance of recovering nature and that interdependency of climate and nature we've talked about, and we do that with the support of and expertise of JNCC and Natural England. We can't influence globally if we don't take action domestically, and we are. We've talked about some of those things, but we are setting ambitious targets, legally binding targets, and independent scrutiny. We're increasing the deployment of nature-based solutions in our flood defences, expanding our protected areas, and our high-quality, well-planned nature networks to achieve 30 by 30. And we are changing the way that we support agriculture so that our public money is directed away from subsidy to payment for nature recovery and delivery of other public benefits. And this domestic leadership is what can support that vital international leadership. It is going to be crucial at the CBD COP. Working with others who share our high ambitions and influencing the less ambitious governments and getting that agreement to halt and reverse biodiversity loss globally by 2030, to protect 30 by 30 on land and in oceans, and stronger mechanisms for holding countries to account for implementing that framework. So we have the evidence, we know the actions needed, we've talked about them today, so we need to take our leadership, all of us, together in this room and amplify the messages we've heard to assure our future.
Tamara, thank you very much indeed for that endorsement of today, if you like. Just in conclusion, today is a very unusual day. We haven't in the agencies done this for a long time. We don't do this very often. It's a great opportunity. The time is now for action. But what we wanted to do was show you that action is possible. We lay out some of the things that can be done. So do read the statement, promulgate the statement in your organisations, dare I say, on Twitter or wherever, but beyond that as well, because this is a really deep, meaningful moment, if you like, for the agencies across the UK. So we can only do this in the future in partnership with you. That's the other conclusion I take from today. So please let us know how we can collectively work with you. But getting the 4 countries together for this event, I think, has been really an excellent experience for JNCC. So thank you to all my colleagues in country agencies and in central government around the UK. That's been a fantastic joint effort. So thank you for that. Can I also thank all those just directly involved in organising today? It's been a huge amount of work. I said to somebody earlier, we just glide in for an hour or two and it's all just there. But actually, this has been weeks of work in the formation. So thank you, everyone who helped draft the statement and who was involved in today. Thanks especially JNCC staff here. It's been impeccably organised as ever. So thank you very much. Drinks are through the door there. Please carry on the conversation. The conversation will continue well beyond today as well. But thank you all for coming and have a safe journey home. There should be refreshments through there. Thank you.